Former presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi, recently warned that the nation's debt could surpass 200 trillion naira by the year end. But responding to his warning, presidential aide Mr. Sunday Dare defended President Tinubu's borrowing plan as strategic and safe for the country. Tinubu's administration secured Senate approval for a $21 billion external borrowing plan, plus 758 billion naira in domestic bonds spread across 2025 through to 2026.
Nigeria's debt-to-GDP ratio post-rebasing stands at 39%, below the 40% threshold. Mr. Peter Obi warned that total debt could hit 200 trillion naira, citing fiscal indiscipline, poor infrastructure, and worsening poverty. Sunday Dare insists that the loans are tied to infrastructure and social sector investment, not recurrent spending. So the question is, what exactly is at stake? Join us this morning for this discussion is the CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Good morning, Dr. Yusuf, and thanks for joining us for Breakfast Central this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. Dr. Yusuf, critics like Peter Obi say that Nigeria's borrowing lacks discipline and is worsening our fiscal vulnerability. In your view, is there a line between strategic borrowing and reckless debt accumulation? And has this administration crossed it? Where are we at this point of our nation move?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Your previous guest, I think, did an excellent job of explaining, part of the question that you are raising concerning debt. What is most important as far as debt is concerned is what we call the sustainability of the debt. And we have a number of metrics or consideration of factors that we use to assess the sustainability of the debt of a country. The first is the cost of the debt. We need to know exactly what is the cost. And when I say cost, I mean the interest payment. Because there are concessionary debts and there are debts that are commercial. Concessionary debts are much easier in terms of sustainability than commercial debts because they are cheaper and they are more long-term. The second major consideration is the tenure of the debt. If you have a debt that is long-term, 20 years, 30 years, that gives you a lot more room to maneuver in such a way that if along the line your liquidity improves, you can even refinance the debt and get out completely from the debt, rather than having short-term debts that will choke your cash flow. So the tenure of the debt is also something that is very important. The third is the purpose for which you are taking the debt. Your previous guest, alluded excellently to that. We need to have full information as to what exactly are we borrowing for. Are we borrowing to support expenditures or projects that will support productivity in the economy? Or are we borrowing to support things that sometimes we even find difficulty in measuring or in monitoring? So the purpose of the debt is also very critical. Then there's also the capacity to service the debt. The country should not borrow beyond its capacity. Otherwise, if a country begins to default in debt, then it creates a whole lot of issues. It creates a whole lot of credibility issues, image issues, and so on and so forth. So these are the criteria which I think we need to subject the current debt situation to before we come to any conclusion as to whether these debts are worthwhile, whether they are sustainable or not. So the central issue here is about sustainability. And when I look at the general debt profile, I think, for instance, over 50% of the debts are multilateral debt. That's debts owed to, I'm talking of external debt now, owed to World Bank, African Development Bank, and all of that. Then there is also the component of the debt that is bilateral. Both the bilateral debts and the multilateral debts are generally very concessionary in terms of the costs. Most times, some of these debts are just about 2%, 1%, and most times they are also long term. And if you look at some of those debts, they are also committed directly to projects. If you take the Chinese loan, for instance, if you look at our railway projects, most of them are coming directly from the Chinese facility. If you look at our airports, most of them are coming from the Chinese facilities, and even the ports. So there are some loans that are committed directly to projects that can improve capacity. So these are the things that we need to worry about as far as issues of debt is concerned.
All right. There's so many other areas to look at. Of course, the post-GDP rebasing is another conversation that has come into the spotlight. Debt to GDP is about 39% we're seeing here. But the question is whether this affects or reflects the current reality of Nigerians. The report, you made reference to the last conversation. We talked about the consumption power, consumption ability of Nigerians. So would you say that, these borrowings have impacted or have the potential to impact Nigerians who have been referred to as 133 million of them being multidimensionally poor?
Well, issue of the welfare of the people, has a lot more dimensions to it than issue of debt. It's also generally about the macroeconomic policy. It's also about the priority of spending. And it's also about how collectively all the tiers of government, all the levels of government are playing their parts as far as the welfare of the people is concerned. I'm talking now about the federal government, the state governments, and the local governments. All of them together have to bring something to the table as far as the welfare of the people is concerned. At the macroeconomic level, because that is important, because when you look at the poverty situation, one of the major drivers of poverty is inflation, because inflation erodes the purchasing power of the people and make people a lot poorer. So how well we manage the macroeconomic environment to ensure that inflation does not get completely out of hand is a major thing that the government needs to do. And the way you also manage your debt could also impact on the inflation. The level of deficit you incur could also impact on inflation. The rate at which you print money, just as you had in the previous administration, will impact on inflation. So managing inflation, managing our foreign exchange environment, ensuring stability has a major role to play in addressing the issue of welfare, because these are the factors that create a whole lot of issues around poverty. Then there's also the issue of addressing specifically the basic needs of the people. And that relates more to the priority of spending. I'm talking now about, for instance, issues of food. How do we spend in a way to ensure that we're able to bring down the cost of food, especially domestically? And that speaks to issue of particularly addressing the issue of insecurity, for instance, issues of logistics of moving the food products from the farm to the market, So these are issues of packaging, issues of storage. These are critical structural issues that needs to be addressed to ensure that we ensure that we have better environment and support for farmers, and issues of technology in our agriculture. Because if you look at practically all sectors of the economy, one sector that has been lagging behind in terms of leveraging technology is agriculture. Because most of our agricultural practices are still what it used to be some 20, 30 years ago. So transformation, mechanization, and all of that, which I think part of which the government has been doing, all these visits to Brazil and all of that, there's a whole lot of talk about tractors coming in and so on and so forth. And we are seeing quite a number of state governments also supporting their farmers to improve food production. But the biggest challenge as far as food production is concerned is this issue of insecurity. So again, the government has been doing its best to tackle the problem of insecurity. But when you are dealing with an asymmetric warfare, because this is not a regular warfare, this is a guerrilla war. And it's a very, very challenging war to deal with. So that is also an issue. Then issues of electricity and things like that will enable small businesses to thrive a lot more. That is also critical. So the way we spend, the structure of spending, the way we address the macroeconomic issues, stability, inflation, exchange rate, all those things also have implications, for the poverty of the people. And I must emphasize again that all the tiers of government, all levels of government have to bring something to the table. They need to be a lot more accountable to the citizens. Or for the citizens, the only way you can convince the citizens that this reform or economic policies are working is when they see an impact on their lives. So I agree with you. It's a very important point that needs to be addressed by all levels of government.
But there's also this fear that the more we borrow, the more it continues to devalue our currency. Hence why we have a struggle, because obviously we're borrowing in dollars, and when we have to repay back, we also have to ensure that we convert the naira to dollar and get to pay back. Is it not further devaluing the currency? And isn't this also going to be an indicator to foreign investors when we look at FDI? Are they not going to be afraid that if they come, there might be some form of excessive borrowing overhaul that would indeed affect businesses as well?
No, you see, in economic management, there is a whole lot of moving parts, that work together. It's not just about borrowing. Just as I said, first, it's about using the debt to support the capacity of the economy to grow. Secondly, it's about economic diversification. Third, it's also about export, capacity to export. Third is also about issue of import substitution. These are the things that help to stabilize our balance of payment position. Because what we are relating to has to do with our balance of payment position, our external position. So it depends on how we're able to address issues of export growth, how we're able to address issues of import substitution. Take, for example, until about 2 years ago, we were spending close to $10 billion or even more dollars annually to import petroleum products. Now the situation is changing because we are now able to meet substantially our domestic petroleum products needs. So you can imagine the import substitution effect arising from the production of petroleum products domestically, especially by the Dangote Refinery. And beyond the petroleum products, there are also opportunities coming up now in terms of petrochemicals. Most of our industries rely on imported petrochemical products. Now, when you look at what is happening in some of in Indorama, in Dangote Refinery, and maybe some other refineries that are coming up, the pressure of importation of petrochemical products to support especially our manufacturing sector, chemical industries, plastic industries, those pressure of importation will also reduce. So if we're able to also deal with this issue of insecurity, all this pressure of having to import food will also reduce. So if we're able to tackle that simultaneously, our external position will strengthen. Once the external position is strong, our capacity to repay the debt will not be a big issue. So that is why I'm saying that we need to do so many things together. And we need to also ensure that we activate all our critical policy levers on the monetary policy front, on the fiscal policy front, on investment policy front, to ensure that we achieve all these objectives. So a lot of things needs to work together to be able to deliver these outcomes.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, many argue, some experts have said Nigeria doesn't have a debt problem, but a revenue problem. Do you agree? And if so, what immediate steps should the government take to sustainably grow revenue without stifling the private sector? And I also want to know your take on this new tax reform bill that has just been signed into law. How much effect will they have in the general picture of revenue?
Well, when we look at the size of the economy in relation to the revenue that we have, it will become clear that we are not doing enough in terms of revenue generation. We could do a lot more without necessarily putting too much pressure on investors. And the point here is about efficiency and effectiveness in revenue administration, especially in tax administration. Because if you have an environment where things are so loose and people who are supposed to pay tax are not paying tax and all of that, that could be an issue. And that is part of the things I think that the current tax reform is addressing. If we're able to properly address efficiency in tax administration, I'm not talking about putting more burden on existing taxpayers or increasing the tax rate. I'm talking about efficiency in tax administration, because we saw the example of what happened in Lagos. In Lagos State, I mean, a few years ago, we knew what the revenue position was. But at some point, even I think it was even under the current president as governor of Lagos State, there was introduction of technology and all of that, and all the loose ends, all the loopholes were plugged. And suddenly we saw a dramatic increase in revenue. So I think the same thing is about to play out at the federal level. So if we improve the efficiency and plug the loopholes and the corruption and the leakages, and some of the agencies that are also lavishly spending the revenue they are generating, that will improve the position of our revenues, and also be able to mitigate the fears around the capacity of the government to fiscally sustain the management of the economy and the pressure of debt service on revenue. Because when you look at some of those ratios currently, those ratios are not looking so good. But if the revenue situation improves as a result of this tax reform, we are likely to begin to see an improvement. But more importantly is to ensure that even on the part of government, we see more diligent utilization of resources. We see less corruption. We see proper prioritization of government spending. But that is also very, very important to ensure economic sustainability, and even from a moral point of view. Because if the citizens are paying taxes, they must see that you are using the taxes very well, transparently, and judiciously, in a way that they feel it inspires the confidence of the citizens that, yes, our resources are being managed well. So the optics are also very important when we talk about, all these issues about fiscal operations of government.
Okay, I'd like to also ask what alternative fiscal measures are available, as opposed to borrowing. If we don't have to borrow, are there other alternative measures that can be employed to achieve the same end results that the government is trying to achieve?
Well, all over the world, government borrows. All over the world, even businesses borrow, because you need to expand the scope of your activity so that you can grow. But that is not to justify that borrowing should now become the major source of funding the activities of government or investing in infrastructure. So the options open is one which I've mentioned, which is optimizing and ensuring effective tax administration. That is one way. The other way is to ensure that the agency investment that government has in some assets. Right now, we have huge investments running to billions of dollars in the oil and gas, for instance. How well are we optimizing the use of those assets? Because there is tax revenue, there is non-tax revenue. So we can do a lot more in the area of non-tax revenue. So that will bring a lot of relief when it comes to, easing the pressure of taxes either on businesses or on the individuals. So maximizing the non-tax revenue from optimizing the assets in the oil and gas, optimizing the assets in our maritime sector, and some of the agencies of government that are also generating revenue, because some of them are making a whole lot of money, most of which are not being remitted to government. So we need to look at all those areas of non-tax revenue and optimize the returns from them. So, and I think that is also part of the things that all these tax and fiscal reforms are all about. If you're able to do that, we're likely to see a dramatic increase in non-tax revenue. And that is in fact, if you look at countries in the Middle East, they make more money from their investment in oil and gas. Far more than what they make in taxes, because they properly utilize those oil and gas assets. And we are blessed in this country, particularly in the area of natural resources. So we need to optimize the use of those resources,
yes,
to be able to boost revenue from the non-tax angle.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, you've said it all, that we are blessed in this area. And not too long ago, myself and my colleagues here, were talking about the Port Harcourt refinery. I mean, over $1.5 billion spent, and yet it's still in a dead state. Nothing is happening. Only one man came and, of course, set up a refinery that's actually servicing the entire country and outside the country. But while we talk about the refineries, the monies that have been spent there, it's not working. I want you to also, let's look at the impact of these refineries that are not working. What would they do if they get them working to the economy? Because it seems like everyone is looking at oil and gas, and there's only one person whose refinery is working. What about the others? What would they do? What would they add to the economy?
Well, there are some modular refineries that are working, although you can't compare their scale to that of the Dangote refinery. And in any case, many of them don't even produce, those modular refineries don't produce PMS. I understand they produce diesel and all of that. But what is clear from history and from our experience is that our public sector cannot manage the refinery. If you continue to insist that the NNPC and all these parastatals of government in oil and gas will manage the refinery, we'll just be throwing good money after bad. So my view is that we should adopt the model we have with the NLNG, that's the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas. Government can sell down its shares, ownership, equity in these refineries and invite the private sector to have controlling shares in those refineries. We don't have the institutional capacity in our public sector, with all due respect, to manage those kind of enterprises. Because if you continue to do that, we continue to waste our very valuable resources. And we have done that for several decades. We cannot afford to continue that. So for me, getting the government to take the back seat, getting a private sector either to take it over completely or to have majority shares in those refineries is the way to go. Otherwise, if you leave the refineries in the hands of politicians and bureaucrats, we continue to lose very valuable resources and money, and that will not be in the interest of our economy and our citizens at all. So for me, that is the way to go.
Now, finally, Dr. Muda Yusuf, before we let you go, looking ahead, what fiscal reforms or debt management strategies would you recommend to ensure Nigeria doesn't fall into a full-blown debt crisis while still pursuing growth and developmental goals?
Well, first of all, is to ensure that we rely less on foreign borrowing, because foreign debts are much more difficult to service than domestic debt. So the balance of the debt should be focused more on domestic than foreign, so that it doesn't strangulate our external position. It doesn't create problem with us, for the economy in terms of forex and all of that. The second point is to bring a lot more discipline into what we use the borrowed funds for, so that we use borrowed funds strictly for infrastructure, not for all this poverty alleviation, gender this and all these nebulous things that you cannot actually put your fingers on. They have to be tied to projects. Thirdly is to be conscious of the cost of the debt. If the debt is too costly, we should stay away from costly debts, because those things come back to put a lot of pressure on government finances, and it shrinks, it contracts the fiscal space, which now creates problem of deficit, problem of borrowing, problem of inflation, which now comes back to be hurting, the ordinary citizens. So these are some of the things I think we need to be watching out for, so that we don't end up. And of course, I talked about optimizing revenue, tax revenue, and particularly non-tax revenue, so that we don't have recourse so much, to be relying on debt. I think for me, those are basically the things that we need to do to ensure that our debt is sustainable, because it's all about sustainability of debt.
All right, Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you very much for joining us this morning on Breakfast Central. We look forward to having you again.
Thank you
very
so much
much
for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
All right.